Time to travel back in time. Number 10. The volcano that swallowed a civilization. Around 1600 BCE, a Mediterranean island called Thera did not simply erupt, it ceased to exist. The explosion tore the island apart with such violence that it registered in Greenland ice cores, Chinese tree rings, and the sediment of lake beds thousands of kilometers away, leaving a signature in the geological record so distinct that scientists have been arguing about its precise date for over a century. Before the eruption, the Minoan civilization was the most sophisticated culture in the ancient world. They built multi-story cities with indoor plumbing, created elaborate frescoes, developed one of the earliest writing systems, and dominated Mediterranean trade from their island home of Crete. They were, by every measure, a civilization on the ascent. Then, the sky to their north turned black. The Thera eruption has been classified as a VEI 7 event, one of the largest volcanic explosions in the last 10,000 years. It ejected an estimated 60 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. Tsunamis generated by the caldera collapse reached estimated heights of 35 meters along Cretan coastlines, obliterating harbors, fishing fleets, and coastal settlements in minutes. The ash fallout blanketed crops across the eastern Mediterranean for years. What makes Thera genuinely haunting is what happened next. The Minoan civilization, which had flourished for centuries, collapsed within decades of the eruption. Archaeologists continue to debate whether the volcano caused the collapse or merely accelerated a decline already underway. The two explanations are not mutually exclusive, and the evidence supports neither conclusively. Today, the remnant caldera is the tourist island of Santorini, its whitewashed cliffs the exposed interior of a catastrophe. Plato, writing around 360 BCE, described a great island civilization swallowed by the sea. He called it Atlantis. What other vanished civilizations are waiting to be found beneath the waves, stripped of their names by a disaster that left no survivors to remember them? Number 9. The drought that killed the ancient world. Beginning around 2200 BCE, rainfall across the ancient world nearly stopped. Not in one region, not in one empire, but everywhere, simultaneously. Within a single century, the most powerful civilizations on Earth collapsed in sequence like dominoes, and the world they had built over thousands of years disappeared so completely that historians spent centuries assuming it had never existed. The event is known in paleoclimatology as the 4.2 kiloyear event, named for its position 4,200 years before the present. Evidence for it is preserved in the chemical signatures of cave formations called speleothems, particularly those studied in Qunef Cave in Oman, where oxygen isotope ratios record a severe and prolonged reduction in monsoon rainfall. Lake sediment cores from across the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, and North Africa tell the same story. Something fundamental shifted in Earth's atmospheric circulation, and it lasted approximately 200 years. The consequences were staggering. The Akkadian Empire, the world's first empire, collapsed around 2154 BCE after a period of devastating famine. Tel Leilan, a major Akkadian city in what is now Syria, was abandoned and buried under a thick layer of wind-blown dust. Egypt's Old Kingdom, the civilization that built the Great Pyramids, fell apart as the Nile floods failed and centralized food distribution broke down. The great urban centers of the Indus Valley, including Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, saw mass population abandonment. Three of the ancient world's greatest civilizations, on three separate continents, collapsed within the same 200-year window. No single cause for the 4.2 kiloyear event has been confirmed. A shift in the Indian Ocean monsoon system is the leading hypothesis. Some researchers have proposed a large volcanic eruption as the trigger. Others point to subtle changes in solar output. The honest answer, after decades of research, is that scientists have identified the catastrophe with precision and explained its mechanism with almost none. The most terrifying aspect of the 4.2 kiloyear event is not what it destroyed. It is that we still do not know what started it, which means we cannot know whether it is coming again. Number 8. The mega tsunami that drowned a continent. Around 6100 BCE, a section of the Norwegian continental shelf collapsed into the North Sea. The section that collapsed was not a cliff face or a coastal embankment. It was a submarine landslide approximately the size of Iceland, involving roughly 3,500 cubic kilometers of sediment, and when it gave way, it displaced enough water to send tsunami waves crashing into coastlines across the North Atlantic, with heights estimated between 10 and 25 meters. The event is called the Storegga slide, and geologists have reconstructed it through sediment cores pulled from the floors of the North Sea and the North Atlantic. The tsunami deposits are visible in coastal cliff sections across Scotland, Norway, and the Faroe Islands, layers of marine sand sitting far above where the sea should have reached, preserved for 8,000 years, like a watermark left by a catastrophe no living human witnessed. The slide's most likely trigger was the destabilization of frozen methane hydrates on the seafloor, themselves loosened by the rising temperatures of the post-Ice Age world. What the Storegga slide destroyed was not just coastline. It struck Doggerland, a low-lying landmass that had connected Britain to continental Europe since the end of the last ice age, a territory the size of modern Great Britain, inhabited by Mesolithic communities of hunter-gatherers who had lived there for thousands of years. The tsunami did not submerge Doggerland in a single event, but it devastated its populated coastal margins dramatically and accelerated what rising seas were already doing slowly. Within subsequent millennia, Doggerland was gone, swallowed by the North Sea entirely. Today, fishing trawlers working the North Sea regularly pull up mammoth bones, ancient stone tools, and the antlers of red deer from the seafloor, the scattered remnants of a world that is now 30 meters underwater. In 2002, a fragment of worked wood was recovered from sediment cores drilled at Dogger Bank, suggesting human occupation of areas now far beneath the waves. A populated continent vanished into the sea, and we are only now beginning to understand how many people it took with it. Number 7. The simultaneous collapse of every civilization on Earth. Between 1200 and 1150 BCE, virtually every advanced civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean ceased to exist within a single human lifetime. The Mycenaean Greeks, whose palace culture had flourished for centuries, collapsed so completely that their writing system disappeared and was not replaced for 400 years. The Hittite Empire, which had rivaled Egypt as a superpower for 3 centuries, saw its capital city, Hattusa, burned to the ground around 1180 BCE and was never rebuilt. Ugarit, one of the great trading cities of the ancient world, was destroyed around 1185 BCE and abandoned permanently. Before the collapse, the Late Bronze Age had produced a sophisticated, interconnected world. Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, Cyprus, Canaan, and Ugarit were linked by trade networks, diplomatic marriages, and shared technologies. A merchant in Ugarit could source copper from Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan, and grain from Egypt. It was, by the standards of its time, a globalized economy. The palace systems that administered this world had taken centuries to construct. The last known letter from Ugarit, a clay tablet recovered from an unfinished kiln, describes an enemy fleet attacking from the sea. The letter never reached its destination. The city was destroyed before the tablet could be fired. It was never rebuilt. What caused this cascade of collapses is one of history's most fiercely contested questions. Egyptian temple reliefs at Medinet Habu, commissioned by Ramesses III, depict invasions by groups called the Sea Peoples. Evidence also points to severe drought, internal rebellions, disrupted trade networks, and widespread earthquakes across the region. The historian Eric Klein, in his landmark 2014 study of the period, proposed that no single cause brought down the Bronze Age world. Instead, He argued for systems collapse, a scenario in which multiple simultaneous stressors overwhelmed civilizations that had become too interconnected and too dependent on one another to absorb any single shock, let alone several at once. Population of Greece may have declined by up to 90% in some regions. Literacy vanished. Monumental architecture stopped. The Bronze Age collapse is history's most complete civilizational reset. And it is a reminder that complexity is not the same as resilience. Number 6. The cosmic impact that froze the world. Around 10,800 BCE, something struck or exploded above the North American ice sheet with consequences that reached every corner of the planet. The Earth had been warming steadily, emerging from the last ice age over thousands of years, megafauna grazing across landscapes that were slowly greening, and the first humans spreading through the Americas for the first time in history. Then, within a geological instant, the warming stopped. Global temperatures plunged by approximately 10 degrees Celsius in Greenland, according to ice core records, and stayed there for 1,200 years. The period that followed is called the Younger Dryas, and paleoclimatologists have studied its onset for decades. What they found at the boundary layer, the precise geological line marking the moment the warming ended, was disturbing. Sediment cores and exposed rock sections from 4 continents contain anomalous concentrations of platinum and iridium, elements rare in Earth's crust but common in cosmic objects. They also contain microscopic spherules consistent with high-temperature impact events, and nanodiamonds, which form only under the extreme pressures produced by cosmic collisions. In 2007, a research team led by Richard Firestone published these findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, proposing that a fragmented comet or asteroid had exploded above the ice sheet with enough force to trigger a cascade of global consequences. At the same geological boundary, the Clovis culture, the first confirmed human inhabitants of North America, disappears from the archaeological record. The woolly mammoth, the mastodon, the short-faced bear, the American horse, and the giant ground sloth all went extinct within this same window. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains actively contested. No crater has been found, leading some geologists to argue that the impact markers have alternative explanations. The researchers who found the evidence stand by their interpretation, and subsequent studies have continued to find the same anomalous materials at the same boundary layer across more sites. What makes this mystery particularly unsettling is the missing crater. A cosmic impact powerful enough to reverse thousands of years of planetary warming, extinguish dozens of megafaunal species, and erase an entire human culture should have left a scar somewhere on the landscape. It has not been found. Whether it is buried beneath kilometers of ice in Greenland, scattered across the atmosphere as an airburst, or evidence of something geologists have not yet fully characterized, something happened at 10,800 BCE that reset the clock on human prehistory, and its cause remains one of science's most consequential unresolved questions. Number 5. The eruption that almost ended humanity. Approximately 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano beneath what is now Lake Toba in northern Sumatra erupted with a force that dwarfs anything in recorded human history. The eruption ejected an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, a volume roughly 2,800 times greater than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which itself devastated an entire region of the American Northwest. A volcanic winter followed, during which global temperatures are estimated to have dropped between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius, and it lasted for years. The Toba eruption is classified as a VEI 8 event, the highest category on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. Its ash layer has been identified in sediment cores across the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and throughout South Asia, in some places reaching thicknesses of 15 centimeters, thousands of kilometers from the eruption site. The caldera left behind is 100 kilometers long, 30 kilometers wide, and 505 meters deep. It is now a lake. The scale is almost impossible to internalize until you consider that the entire lake you're imagining is the hole left by what was removed. In 1998, anthropologist Stanley Ambrose of the University of Illinois proposed what became known as the Toba catastrophe theory. His analysis of mitochondrial DNA from modern human populations revealed a striking anomaly. The genetic diversity of all living humans is remarkably low, suggesting that at some point in the relatively recent past, the human population collapsed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. The timing of this genetic bottleneck aligns with the Toba eruption. Ambrose proposed that the volcanic winter had driven humanity to the edge of extinction, and that everyone alive today descends from the survivors. The link between Toba and the genetic bottleneck is contested. Archaeological excavations at sites in South Africa, particularly at Pinnacle Point on the coast, have found evidence of human occupation continuing through and after the eruption, suggesting that some populations survived without catastrophic disruption. The debate has not been resolved. What is not disputed is the eruption itself, its scale, or the severity of its global effects. Whether or not it nearly ended our species, the Toba eruption was the largest volcanic event experienced by any human ancestor in the past 2 million years. And the thought that it may have reduced our entire species to a remnant population, smaller than a modern town, is one of the most unsettling ideas in all of human prehistory. Number 4. The real Great Flood. Around 5,600 BCE, the Mediterranean Sea broke through a natural rock barrier at what is now the Bosphorus Strait and began pouring into a vast freshwater lake sitting below sea level on the other side. The breach did not open gradually. According to modeling published in Nature in 2009 by geologist Daniel Garcia Castellanos and his colleagues at the Spanish National Research Council, the initial trickle rapidly carved a channel through which water eventually poured at an estimated rate of 42 cubic kilometers per day, roughly 200 times the flow of Niagara Falls. The lake on the other side began to rise by as much as 15 centimeters per day. That lake is now the Black Sea. Before the breach, it was a freshwater body significantly smaller than the sea it became, surrounded by inhabited shoreline on all sides. The communities living there were Neolithic farming settlements, people who had built permanent homes, cultivated crops, and established lives along the water's edge. When the water began to rise, it did not stop. It rose for months, perhaps years, swallowing the shoreline, the farms, and everything built on them. The total area inundated is estimated at 155,000 square kilometers of previously dry land. In 1997, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman of Columbia University published their reconstruction of the event, and in 2000, oceanographer Robert Ballard, who discovered the wreck of the Titanic, led an expedition to the Black Sea floor. At a depth of approximately 150 meters, his team found ancient shorelines and what appeared to be structures, preserved beneath the cold, oxygen-poor water that had buried them millennia ago. Freshwater species of mollusks were found entombed beneath marine sediments, confirming that the saltwater intrusion had been geologically rapid. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Mesopotamia and the oldest surviving work of literature, describes a catastrophic flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity, survived by a single family who built a vessel to carry animals to safety. The story predates the biblical account of Noah by over 1,000 years. Ryan and Pittman proposed that the Black Sea flood is the event preserved in both accounts, a real catastrophe so devastating that the memory of it survived 7,600 years of retelling. We cannot confirm that yet, but beneath the Black Sea, the evidence of what happened is still there, buried in the sediment, waiting for someone to read it correctly. Number 3. the day Earth's magnetic shield collapsed. Around 42,000 years ago, Earth's magnetic field did not weaken. It nearly vanished. The geomagnetic event known as the La Champ excursion, named for a volcanic field in France, where its signature was first identified in ancient lava flows, saw the planet's protective magnetic shield collapse to approximately 6% of its current strength. For roughly 1,000 years, Earth was almost unshielded from the cosmic ray bombardment that its magnetic field normally deflects. In February 2021, a research team led by geneticist Alan Cooper published a study in the journal Science, proposing that this single event may have triggered the most transformative crisis in human prehistory. The evidence Cooper's team used came from an extraordinary source: ancient kauri trees preserved in the bogs of New Zealand for tens of thousands of years. The rings of these trees contain a precise chemical record of the atmosphere at the time of their growth, and at the layer corresponding to 42,000 years ago, the record shows a dramatic spike in radiocarbon caused by increased cosmic ray penetration. Cross-referenced with ice core data, cave formation records, and the global archaeological timeline, the picture that emerged was deeply unsettling. At the same moment the magnetic field collapsed, Neanderthals disappeared from the fossil record. Denisovans vanished. The megafauna of Australia went extinct, and in a pattern that archaeologists have puzzled over for generations, modern humans across Europe and Australia abruptly retreated into caves and began covering the walls with art. The earliest confirmed cave paintings in Europe, including those at Chauvet Cave in France, dated to approximately 36,000 years ago, appear in the aftermath of this period. Cooper's team nicknamed the event the Adams Event, after Douglas Adams's observation that 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. What the La Champ excursion may have produced in the terrified communities sheltering underground from a sky that burned with expanded auroral radiation near the equator was something that no volcanic eruption or flood or drought ever created. It may have produced consciousness of a particular kind, the need to make meaning in the darkness, to record, to symbolize, to reach for something permanent when the world outside felt catastrophically, inexplicably wrong. Earth's magnetic field is currently weakening. It has lost approximately 9% of its strength since measurements began in 1840. The La Champ excursion is not a theoretical possibility. It is a documented precedent. Number 2. When the Atlantic filled the Mediterranean in a season. Approximately 5.33 million years ago, the Atlantic Ocean broke through the rock barrier at what is now the Strait of Gibraltar, and the consequences were unlike any flood event in the history of life on Earth. For the preceding 700,000 years, the Mediterranean basin had been sealed from the Atlantic, and it had dried up almost completely in an event called the Messinian Salinity Crisis. What remained was a vast salt desert sitting 3 to 5 kilometers below the current sea level, the floor of a vanished ocean, baking under the sun in the deepest enclosed depression on the planet's surface. The modeling published in Nature in December 2009 by Garcia Castellanos and colleagues described what happened when the barrier finally gave way. Water fell thousands of meters into the basin. The initial breach carved itself wider under the force of the flow, and the flow increased as the channel deepened, a self-accelerating catastrophe of almost incomprehensible scale. Estimates of how quickly the Mediterranean refilled range widely, from months to several thousand years, and the debate among geologists is ongoing. What is not disputed is the volume, approximately 1 million cubic kilometers of seawater, transferred from the Atlantic into the empty basin, raising global sea levels in the process by an estimated 10 meters or more. The event has a name, the Zanclean flood, and its evidence is preserved in the geological record across the Mediterranean region. The Strait of Gibraltar, with its distinctive shape and depth profile, was carved to its current dimensions by this event. Marine sediments from the period show the transition from evaporate salt deposits to open ocean fauna within layers that, in geological terms, represent almost no time at all. No human being existed to witness any of it. The genus Homo would not appear for another 4.5 million years. But here is what the Zanclean flood created: the Mediterranean Sea, the body of water that cradled every civilization considered foundational to the modern world. Egypt, Greece, Rome, Phoenicia, Carthage, the Ottoman Empire. 3 of the world's major religions were born on its shores. The concepts of democracy, philosophy, written law, and monotheism all emerged in communities built around a sea that exists only because a rock wall broke 5.33 million years ago. Every event on this list destroyed something. The Zanclean flood destroyed a desert and replaced it with the cradle of human civilization, which makes it the largest act of geological creation in the history of our species, and the most consequential flood no human ever survived to remember. Number 1. The disaster that made us possible. 66 million years ago, an asteroid approximately 12 kilometers wide struck the shallow coastal waters of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico at a velocity of roughly 20 kilometers per second. The impact released energy estimated at 100 teratons of TNT, the equivalent of approximately 6 billion Hiroshima bombs detonated simultaneously. The crater left behind, called Chicxulub, is 180 kilometers in diameter. It was identified in 1978 by geophysicists Antonio Camargo and Glenn Penfield while surveying the Gulf of Mexico for the Mexican National Oil Company, buried under kilometers of sediment and ocean water, invisible and unsuspected for 66 million years. The immediate effects of the Chicxulub impact are difficult to hold in the mind all at once. The explosion generated a tsunami that geologists believe circled the Earth multiple times. Ejecta thrown into the upper atmosphere ignited global wildfires as superheated rock fragments rained back down across the planet. Within weeks, a layer of dust and sulfur aerosols thick enough to block photosynthesis had settled across the entire sky. Global temperatures fell by an estimated 15 to 25 degrees Celsius. In 1980, physicist Luis Alvarez and his son, geologist Walter Alvarez, identified a thin layer of iridium, an element rare in Earth's crust but common in asteroids, preserved in rock formations around the world at precisely the geological boundary marking the end of the Cretaceous period. The impact had left its fingerprint in every exposed rock face on Earth. The extinction it triggered eliminated 75% of all species on the planet. Non-avian dinosaurs, which had dominated terrestrial ecosystems for 165 million years, were gone within a time frame that geologists describe as instantaneous. The Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, the KPG line visible in cliff faces from Spain to New Zealand, marks the precise moment the world changed. Below it, dinosaurs. Above it, the age of mammals. For 160 million years before the impact, mammals had existed as small, nocturnal, mostly insect-eating creatures living in the margins of a world owned by something else. The asteroid did not just kill the dinosaurs. It opened a door. Within 300,000 years of the impact, a geological blink, mammal species began diversifying at a rate that paleontologists call explosive. The ecological niches vacated by the dinosaurs were filled rapidly and completely. Within 10 million years, the first primates had appeared. Within 65 million years, one lineage of those primates had developed language, agriculture, writing, and the capacity to look back at the rock record and piece together what had happened to the world before them. Every language ever spoken, every city ever built, every piece of music ever composed, every question ever asked about the nature of the universe, all of it traces back, through an unbroken chain of survivors and descendants, to the aftermath of a Tuesday morning 66 million years ago, when a rock fell out of the sky and the world that had existed for 165 million years ended in fire. The Chicxulub impact did not reset civilization. It made civilization possible. We are not the inheritors of a disaster. We are the disaster's intended consequence, shaped by catastrophe, selected by extinction, and handed a world that had to be destroyed before it could become ours. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.